Hopefully we can cover a few other things as well, but let's get into the Penn State thing here. I read this Sunday, and you probably saw it as well, I'd imagine, the Sunday piece on Spanier.
Graham Spanier,
the ex-president of Penn State. What'd you think of that story from top to bottom?
I was shocked by it because it was about as close, although it still was pretty far away, it was about as close to the truth of this case than anything in the mainstream news media we've seen that I wasn't involved with. The reality is the New York Times was forced to admit that the case against the Penn State president may be, quote, fatally flawed. And for them to say that, Dino, what that really means is that the writer of that article knows that the charges against him are absurd. I have spoken to Graham Spanier for hours and hours and hours over the last almost 3 years. I can assure you, there is nothing I am more positive in this entire case than that Graham Spanier was not involved in the cover-up and is not guilty of any criminal charge.
Well, you know, the interesting thing about Spanier, John, that I didn't know about, and I don't know if you knew about it before the story, that he was, a different kind of abuse, the physical abuse at the hands of his father growing up, which really kind of startled me and made me think, my goodness, you know, and the writer followed up by bringing this thought about in the next paragraph, you know, a kid who was abused by his father, as Graham Spanier was, you would think an individual like this would be quick to come to the defense of any children that he perceived were being abused in any capacity by anybody else.
Of course, but of course, Graham Spanier was never told that any kid was abused because no kid was being abused. And that's the most obvious and simple reality of this. And like I said, I know Graham Spanier now exceedingly well. I know this case better than anybody on the planet. There is zero chance. By the way, it doesn't even make any logical sense for Graham Spanier to be part of a cover-up because if he had begun, he's the president, right? So he would have to start a cover-up. No one would come to him and say, hey, let's get involved in a criminal cover-up for no apparent reason. And if he had started it, Dino, use your brain, I mean, you're a smart guy, guess what would have happened the moment that Curley and Schultz, the former athletic director and the former head of the campus police, the moment they got indicted, they would have flipped on him. And they would have said, wait a minute, hold on. We were instructed to do this by our president. Well, that hasn't happened. The reason that hasn't happened is because they weren't told that. The reason they weren't told that is because there was no cover-up. The reason there was no cover-up was because there was nothing to cover up.
Now, the kid in the shower.
Yeah.
The kid in the shower.
Yes.
You said you know more about this case than anyone, and I believe you. I don't think that's a false statement. But the kid in the shower now, is he in on the lawsuit that is currently going on? Because you said during the interview that I watched on CNN that kid, now an older kid who was in the service, drove hours to go back to some event that Sandusky himself was involved in.
His mother's funeral.
Okay.
Jerry's mother's funeral.
Okay. But now, John, I've heard conflicting reports. He's part of the lawsuit. He's looking for money. What's the deal?
This part of the story is better than any mystery novel you've ever read. Only it's real and it's amazing. And this is the heart of the whole case. I've done an hour-long video, which people can find at framingpaterno.com, but I'm going to give you, which I released just last week, which has gotten rave reviews. But I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version right now. Here's the story of the boy in the shower, okay?
Yeah.
His name is Alan Myers.
And where is Alan Myers right now?
He lives outside of State College in Mill Hall, Pennsylvania.
What does he do?
And, he lives in a very nice house because he got $3 million from Penn State. All right, so he is a former Marine, but he's no longer in the Marines, doesn't have a driver's license because he had 2 DUIs. By the way, represented by the same lawyer who suddenly and coincidentally represented 9 victims in this, or accusers in this case, including coincidentally Matt Sandusky, who's lying through his teeth. But here's the story of Alan Myers. On the date of the so-called shower episode that Mike McQuarrie witnessed, Alan Myers is a month short of his 14th birthday. He's 2 years short of being a varsity letter winner on his high school football team. After this occurs, he gets a phone call from Jerry several weeks later saying, hey, Penn State may want to contact you because someone saw us in the shower. We don't know who it is, but, will you just talk to them and tell them what happened? Alan tells Jerry, sure, no problem. Penn State, unfortunately, never contacts Alan. So Alan never thinks about this again for many, many years until the crap hits the fan in November of 2011. Well, before the crap hit the fan nationally in November of 2011 and Paterno got fired and all that, the investigators actually call up Alan Myers and say, you're a second mile kid. We'd like to talk to you about Jerry Sandusky, because they're still on this wild goose chase looking for victims because they haven't indicted Jerry yet. Well, Alan calls Jerry and says, what do you think I ought to do? Jerry calls Alan back and leaves 2 voicemail messages, which have been made very public and have gotten a lot of publicity, where at the end of them, Jerry says, love you, bye.
Right, I've heard that, yeah.
Okay, now to the moronic media, that's the only thing that's important about these messages, is that Jerry says, love you. But the reality is that those messages are exceedingly important, and I believe extraordinarily exculpatory towards Jerry Sandusky, because he's telling Alan, go ahead, come forward, tell your story. You've got nothing really to hide. Now, of course, at this time, the story is not public, so it's not Barbara Walters that's calling Alan Myers asking for him to come forward and tell his story. It's police. So Alan comes to the police in September of 2011 and tells them, Jerry never did anything to me. Jerry's the greatest thing that's ever happened in my life. And he ends the interview, by saying, you're never going to get me to say anything bad about Jerry Sandusky. So then the crap hits the fan, so they don't call him to the front of the grand jury. He's not part of the indictment. And Jerry gets indicted and arrested, and the crap hits the fan. And on the day that Joe Paterno would be fired that night, Alan Myers comes into the office with his mother, Joe Amendola, Jerry's defense attorney, and gives a statement, an extraordinary statement, which you can find at our website, framingpaterno.com, to an FBI-trained investigator, former police officer, in which he says, I am the boy in the shower that McQuarrie is talking about. McQuarrie has got this wrong. I don't know what he's talking about. I was there. I remember several of the details. I remember Jerry telling me that Penn State was going to call. Go ahead.
There we go. He said this to who now?
To Joe Amendola's investigator, an FBI-trained former police officer.
Okay, why? If this is on the record.
Yes.
Okay. How come nobody talks about this?
I went on the Today Show and I waved a statement in the air in front of Matt Lauer. I went on Piers Morgan. I did the same thing. I got not one media inquiry, Dino, because no one has an incentive to tell this story. The prosecution wants him to go away. They didn't call him to testify because they don't like his story.
Wait a minute. Wait. Now, during the trial that Sandusky was ultimately convicted,
right.
They refused to call the kid in the shower?
There was no kid. There was no witness claiming to be the kid in the shower in that trial, Dino.
But did they know who this kid was at that time?
Yes, they did. Of course they did. They had interviewed him, but they didn't call him, so they pretended he didn't exist because they didn't like his story.
Could the defense have not called him?
Okay, well, here's where this story gets bizarre or complicated. Okay, so 2 weeks after Alan gives this blockbuster statement to Joe Amendola and to his investigator, the investigator and Amendola look at each other. They go, "Oh my God, we busted the case. McQuarrie's toast, right?" And so, but then Joe gets a letter from Andrew Shubin, who I've already mentioned would be Alan's lawyer on his DUI and would end up representing him and Matt Sandusky and 7 other accusers in this case, saying he represents Alan Myers. Now, at first, Joe Amendola thinks, great, Alan needs representation to be part of this crap storm, right, that he's about to be part of. Yeah. Andrew then says, no. Shubin says to Joe Amendola, you got this wrong. Alan is a victim in this case. As a matter of fact, he was one of the worst victims in this case. Now, at the time, Joe's in the middle, his ship is sinking, right? I mean, he's representing Sandusky. Sandusky's done the Costas interview, which was a disaster. Everybody in the world's turned against Jerry. And he...
At the time, did you think the Costas interview was detrimental to Sandusky?
I knew it was detrimental from a PR standpoint, but right. I got to tell you, even though at this time I thought Jerry was guilty, and I've said this 100 times, and this is very important, The infamous answer that he gave to Bob Costas on "Are you attracted to sexually attracted to young boys?"
Right.
I have always felt was so bad that it was far more consistent with innocence than guilt. And I think you'll understand the logic here. It was beyond my comprehension that someone could not be able to answer that question immediately and declaratively, although it's important to point out that Jerry does answer the question eventually, saying no. But the answer was so bad, there is no way that person could get away with being a serial pedophile for several decades. It's just not possible. If you were guilty, you would know immediately to say, Bob, come on, that's ridiculous. I can't believe you're asking that question. That's your answer, right? That would be anybody's answer if you were guilty. But if you're not, and you're Jerry, and I know him to talk this way now, and Dottie, I actually have Dottie on tape joking about how it drives her crazy that Jerry talks this way about everything. You ask him what time it is, and he checks 3 watches before he tells you it's 4:45. I mean, that's just the way he is. And so anyway, I think that's important context. But so we're in the midst of this crap storm. Joe Amendola thinks, oh my God, now Alan's a victim. He's got all these holes in the boat that's sinking to fill, and Joe believes Shubin. Well, Joe now believes, and Jerry agrees with him, that he believes that Andrew Shubin was bluffing him about Alan, and that Alan has never said he was a victim, and I now have proof, or at least I believe it to be proof, that that's in fact the case, because I have seen the insurance file that of Alan's case where he got $3 million from Penn State. And lo and behold, Dino, and I have always been a little bit concerned that in that insurance file there would be a new statement from Alan Myers saying, you know what, I didn't tell the truth when I came forward to Joe Amendola. I wanted to protect Jerry. I didn't want to admit that I was abused. All of that would be at least somewhat reasonable, right? I mean, we've been told that that's the way abuse victims work. Yeah. Well, guess what? There's nothing in the file at all from Alan Myers. There's no new statement. In fact, there's no statement at all. I've contacted the insurance company. They weren't even aware of the statement that Alan Myers made on the day Joe Paterno was fired, saying he was never abused. And oh, by the way, I have an investigator who's made contact with Alan twice in his home, including once that was taped, although taped illegally, in which we strongly believe that Alan has reaffirmed his original statement to Amendola's investigator, saying nothing ever happened.
Does Alan stop to pause to consider that his accepting of that $3 million will then lead people to conclude, obviously, if this guy's taking the money, he feels this is compensation for the years of abuse that he suffered at the hands of Sandusky?
Well, here's what I think happened, and I think this is logical, though you can tell me if you disagree. Here's what I think happened. So Alan goes in on November 9th, that day, okay? The crop is hitting the fan, but it hasn't exploded yet, okay? So that day he gives the statement. That night, Paterno is fired. Graham Spanier is fired. That night there are riots in the streets. 2 days later, there's a candlelight vigil at Penn State. The crap really hits the fan. At that point, Andrew Shubin, his attorney, comes to him and says, hey, Alan, I understand you knew Jerry. Tell me your story. He tells him his story. Shubin convinces him, well, you may not have realized it, but you were being groomed by Jerry Sandusky. You were a victim, even though you didn't realize it. Well, Alan... He's a 24-year-old former Marine. He's married. He has no job. He needs money. He's being told by the world that Jerry Sandusky is a pedophile. He's being told by Andrew Shubin, hey, just shut up. I'm going to get you millions of dollars. Well, what would you do in that situation?
Well, why doesn't this kid hold a press conference now to clear the air and say, I might have accepted this money, but I'm here to tell everybody that Jerry Sandusky never laid a hand on me?
Because I think he's confused as hell. My investigator believes, having been in his house with him and confronted him about this, and having spoken to his wife, my investigator, who's a very seasoned investigator, believes that he is guilt-ridden and confused and doesn't know what the fuck to do. And you got to remember that $3 million. Now that he's taken the money, he's basically been bought and paid for by Penn State, and I'm sure he's got an attorney. In fact, his attorney told Jason Carroll of CNN that I'm a crackpot, right? I'm sure that the only thing he's hearing is from me. And by the way, I have contacted Alan in numerous ways. The day after I contacted them on Facebook. His Facebook page was gone. His wife's Facebook page was gone. I've called him. I've emailed him. I have made videos just for Alan, asking him to live up to his oath as a Marine and to tell the truth and to stand up for what is right. I've done everything. I've tried to get Dottie to go with one of her sons who believes that Alan went to the Marines to emulate him, to go visit him, and to say, hey, what the hell's going on?
Why haven't you yourself gone to see this guy?
Well, I live in Los Angeles, California.
Well, I know that, but you've been across the country a couple times doing this.
Well, I have not been back to State College since I learned of his exact address. The last time I was back at State College, we thought we knew where he lived, and it turned out we were
John,
wrong.
this kid can end the whole thing. I mean, that's how important I think this next step is to take for you. You've got to get him on the record saying, in no way, shape, or form is Jerry Sandusky, at least with me, he never touched me. Because that can move this issue in a completely different angle that could allow the trial to be reheard again.
Well, I understand and I agree with you to a certain extent, but now do you understand why I have been, to use your word, obsessed with this for the last 2.5 years?
Yes, and I'll acknowledge something to you, that you're going to have a better time. In fact, you might have moved me a little bit off of my initial long-held belief that Paterno was aware of the entire thing. You're going to have a better chance of doing that with what I know, what I've read as I've taken another look at this, than Sandusky is not the pedophile that he's been put away for. And listen, I watched that thing with Dottie. I was moved by that. I really was. Either that lady is the world's greatest actor, or she's living in a delusional state of mind that she has blocked out everything. And I applaud you for all the efforts you've made in this thing. I, unlike, and you should know this, the rest of the media don't consider you to be a crackpot, if you will. I think you've been diligent. I think you've been thorough. I think you've been comprehensive. But there's still some things looming, John, that I'm not ready to say that Sandusky is not the pedophile that he's been accused of. But here's the thing I want you to know. Some of the reasons, and I hate to admit this to you, but there's no other way for me to say it, and I hate saying what I'm going to say to you. To me, in the interviews, whether it's the Costas interview, the interview with the New York Times reporter, where some of it was filmed, some of it wasn't. You know which one I'm referring to?
Sure.
He looks, he sounds like a guilty guy to me, John.
Right.
His expressions, his body, his mannerisms, he just looks like a guy that's guilty. He doesn't give answers that make me believe the authenticity of his denial.
I understand that, and you're certainly not alone on that. I will agree with you that Jerry is a strange bird. He talks in very odd ways. I've spoken to him twice in prison for 3 hours each, and also on the phone. I've got dozens and dozens of letters from him. By the way, he's an amazing letter writer. I'll tell you what, if he ever is exonerated, Dino, he is going to write a book that will match the sales of the Bible for that particular year. He is an extraordinary writer, but I think part of the problem here is, and I've thought a lot about this, Dino. And by the way, I really appreciate more than you realize your open-mindedness on this and your evolution of thought on this. It means a lot to me. But let me give you my sense of what Jerry is about. And I don't even really like Jerry that much, even though I'm putting my ass in the line, mainly because I really strongly believe in justice, and injustice was done here to a lot of people, not just him. I think Jerry got caught in a perfect storm that was part of his own making. And part of his own making was that he is a guy who was so arrogant and so confident that he was doing the right thing in trying to help these very, very troubled kids, that I think he felt as if, wait a minute, I know what I'm doing is not wrong. And it almost has a Christ-like, and this is not a positive, he almost has a Christ-like complex about him. I'll give you an example. When I did the Today Show interview, and some people thought I was defending Sandusky. Well, Jerry thought I was throwing him under the bus the first time I did the Today Show interview, and he happened to write me a letter on Good Friday in which he referred to me as Judas. And I thought that
Judas?
Yes. I thought that was very interesting on Good Friday for him to write that I was Judas.
Why?
Well, what does that make him? That makes him Jesus.
Yeah, but Judas betrayed Jesus.
Right. Well, he thought I had betrayed him.
In what way?
But because I had gone on the Today Show, and when Matt Lauer asked me for the third time, because I did not want to talk about this, because Frank O'Hara, look, I'll be very, very honest with you, Dino. I had grave suspicions about Jerry's guilt as soon as I got out of prison after interviewing him. But Frank O'Hara told me very specifically, you cannot express any doubt about this because it will destroy any ability to try to make this about Joe.
Right. Franco believes to this day that Joe was not culpable in any of this. Does Franco share your opinion about Sandusky?
Franco and I have talked a lot about this, and I don't want to put words in Franco's mouth.
Well, in a roundabout way, try to tell me. If Franco was in front of me right now and I said, do you agree with John or not on his theories about Sandusky, would he agree or disagree?
I think he would probably say some pretty nice things about my investigative work and say that his focus is on Joe Paterno.
Okay, I'm going to guess that he doesn't agree with you. All right, I'm going to assume I'm going to assume that he doesn't buy lock, stock, and barrel.
Here's what I will say. He will agree with me 1,000% that Jerry Sandusky did not get due process and that his trial was not fair. He will 1,000% agree.
Okay, we have McQueary, who you've come up with several different theories as to McQueary and the authenticity or the veracity of his statements, the timeline, the dates, all that other stuff. I'll give you that, okay? But on the other side of that coin, he did have time, did he not, before he went to testify, he did have time to think about what it was he saw all those days ago. And if he had a moment of clarity where he said to himself, well, I didn't see what I thought I saw, wouldn't he have said that during the trial? What was his motivation at that exact... Because you think he's lying, right?
Well, I think at some points he's lying, and I think at some points he has been manipulated. Here's what I think happened with Mike McQueary. This is a great story. This is another great story. So, on February 7th of 2001, Kenny Jackson leaves Penn State to take a job with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Kenny Jackson was the wide receivers coach with Penn State.
Mm-hmm.
All right?
Mm-hmm.
So 2 days after that, Mike McQueary hears, that's important, hears, not sees.
That there's going to be a vacancy.
Well, no. He hears some slapping sounds in the Penn State locker room and looks in through a mirror and sees Jerry and a boy for literally 2 or 3 seconds by his own testimony. He's upset by it. He calls his dad. He goes over to see his dad. Now, his dad, from everything that I know about his dad, is a very manipulative character, all right? I believe that his dad immediately saw this as a great opportunity for Mike McQueary to get some FaceTime with Joe Paterno.
To get Jackson's job.
With a job wide open. Show Joe Paterno what a great Boy Scout you are. You're doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. You're reporting Jerry Sandusky. And, and by the way, this is an aside. I hope you have enough time for this.
Yeah, go ahead. We got all the time in the world.
It's a great story. So, and by the way, this theory that I'm giving you right now was Jay Paterno's theory that he told me in September of 2012, well after the Free Report, which I didn't buy at first. I thought that seems crazy, but then I found several items which back it up. Number one item to back it up, Jay had no knowledge of this. I'm in the Paterno kitchen, the very same kitchen where the McQueary-Paterno conversation took place. I'm sitting at the very same table where the conversation took place.
Right.
And you may recall that McQueary testified that when he first called Joe and said, hey, I'd like to come see you, that Joe says to him... If
this is about the job, I don't want to hear it.
Exactly.
Right.
So I mentioned this testimony completely innocuously because I've never thought at the time this is even important. I just thought it was an interesting little detail, weird for him to remember 10 years later, but not a big deal. Sue Paterno, who was getting some peachy Paterno ice cream from the kitchen 10 feet away, turns and literally screams at me, that never happened.
What never happened?
Joe saying that to Mike. That this is about a job, don't bother coming over, I don't have one for you.
Okay.
Now, you got to remember, Sue was there that day, and I'm I have a lot of confidence when it comes to women who have been married to husbands for 40, 50 years, that they know everything their husband does, doesn't do, what he says, what he doesn't say, what's likely to come out of his mouth and what is not. And the fact that she was so adamant about that, I take as a very strong piece of evidence that Joe never said that. Now, why would Mike say that? Well, Mike would say that if in some place in his conscience or subconscious, it was about a job for him to come over. Are you following me? And this is not the only time in this case where Mike McQuarrie has created a reality to cover for a lie. And that is, and in fact...
Well, John, that's pretty fucking evil, then. I mean, right? I mean, there's no other way to put it. That's fucking evil. He's going to put the life of a respected, admired, Christ-like figure, your words, in Happy Valley, in the crosshairs of something to advance his own cause to get a fucking wide receiver's position?
Well, you got. Whoa, hold on a second. You got to follow the whole story. He's not telling. I don't believe he ever told Joe Paterno that Jerry Sandusky assaulted a boy. I think he's just reporting.
Okay, you're claiming that at that table that morning,
right?
Paterno never heard anything about the shower incident.
No. Here's what I think happened. Let me just tell you what I think actually happened. Here's what I think actually happened. Okay, so McQuarrie goes to Paterno partially to get FaceTime, show him what a good Boy Scout he is. He tells him about, hey, Joe, last night I was in the locker room and I saw Jerry with a boy. He looked like he was about 10 or 11 years old. They were horsing around. It seemed really inappropriate to me. It bothered me, and I really thought that you needed to know this. Okay? There's nothing remotely inconsistent with what we know after that, with that interpretation of events. Because the meeting takes place for 10, 15 minutes. Joe says, thank you very much for bringing this to our attention. He immediately calls the athletic director, who gets in touch with the head of campus police, and they do an investigation. All right? Now, the only thing that contradicts this at all, this version of events, is that 10 years later, at the age of 84, Joe Paterno testifies in front of the grand jury in a very, very unsure way. I mean, he's mumbling, stumbling, bumbling, doesn't know for sure what the heck to say, but he eventually says the words that he remembered it to be of a sexual nature that Mike told him, and that there was a word, that he uses the word fondling. Now, those three words, sexual nature and fondling, are used, of course, basically to destroy Joe Paterno, which is rather ironic, Dino, because, and this might be the most important thing I say to you today, is that under the worst interpretation of Jerry Sandusky, it was Joe Paterno's testimony that put Jerry Sandusky in jail. Because without Joe Paterno's testimony, I don't believe there's any indictments in this case. Because without Joe Paterno's testimony, Mike McQuarrie's hanging out on a limb all by himself, contradicted by everybody else in this case. And because Joe Paterno was Joe Paterno and he was that powerful, if Joe Paterno had simply said, you know what, I don't remember what Mike told me, I don't believe they have the balls to go indict Jerry Sandusky, because they needed to protect Mike McQuarrie. Are you following me?
Yes.
So I believe that what happened here, and this will take a very long explanation, but it's my belief after 2.5+ years looking into this, that what actually transpires is that at the age of 84, Joe gets a subpoena to testify. He doesn't remember what the fuck Mike McQuarrie told him 10 years earlier.
Right.
So what happens? He asks Mike McQuarrie, Mike, what the hell did you tell me? And or Scott Paterno, who's acting as Joe's lawyer, and Scott Paterno is a complete fucking moron, as I've told you before. It is my belief that Mike McQuarrie and or Scott Paterno, not evilly, but probably with good intentions, misrefresh Joe Paterno's recollection. And they feed him with a couple of words that Mike never told him 10 years earlier. Now, the reason they do this is because both Mike and Scott are convinced at this point that Jerry's a pedophile. And that's the most important element of this. Mike's view of what he saw in 2001 or heard in 2001 is changed in November 2010 when investigators come to him. And by the way, he thinks at first it's because he had sent penis pictures of himself through a Penn State phone to a Penn State co-head.
McQuarrie, right, yeah.
McQuarrie had. Right. So when investigators come to him and they say, Mike, we got this anonymous email from a retired Baltimore cop, who we now know a great deal about, but has never spoken publicly about this. Facebook. We got this anonymous email saying we should talk to you about something you may have seen with Jerry in the shower. By the way, we have a kid by the name of Aaron Fisher who is saying that he's been forced to have sex with Jerry for the last several years.
Is Aaron Fisher the kid that Chris Cuomo did the
Yes.
Okay, I want to talk about that kid in a second, but go ahead.
Please do. All right, so what I think happens is investigators come to Mike, and this is very rational, Dino, and I think I would have reacted the same way. So you're Mike McQuarrie. Investigators come to you. You're antsy as hell because you think it's because of a career-ending penis picture situation. And they say, we believe Jerry's a pedophile. There's a grand jury investigation. We've got these victims who say they had sex with Jerry. Actually, only one at this time. But we've got other kids who are saying that some weird things happened. We hear you heard something or saw something. What can you do? Can you help us? Well, of course, McQuarrie's going to go, oh, my God. Holy fuck.
I'm off the hook.
Well, no.
This isn't what I thought it was.
Exactly. Yeah. He's thinking, oh my God, 10 years ago I knew it was weird, but I didn't know it was that fucking weird, right? So it's perfectly human nature to go, wow, okay, I can help you. I always suspected it was worse than I thought, and let me tell you what I saw, and then over 10 years, he may have even created some memories. Like, for instance, one of the things he says in his testimony, which I believe is totally false. Now, is this a lie, or did he create this memory? I don't know. He says that he made eye contact with Alan Myers, the boy, and with Jerry Sandusky. Well, Mike McQuarrie is a 6'4" blazing redhead, right? You see Mike McQuarrie in that situation, you know you saw Mike McQuarrie. There's no mistaking it. Well, both Jerry and Alan are positive they never saw Mike McQuarrie, and they never knew who the witness was. So Mike is either lying about that or he's created that memory. Now, I'm actually willing to give him the benefit of the doubt that maybe over time, and Mike has a huge desire to have done more than he actually did. Because now he's being criticized, of course, for being a pussy, right? How could you not beat the crap out of Sandusky if you saw him assaulting a boy?
Right.
So in his mind, I think he has created some things that make it seem like he did more than he actually did. See, I don't think he did anything. I think he saw in the mirror, identified it as Sandusky, misidentified the age of the boy, and left. That's what I think happened. That's all that I think happened. And I think the evidence is overwhelming that that's the case. So what we have here, and this is the whole case, Dino, what I call the Loch Ness this is the Loch Ness Monster phenomenon. Nobody thought there was a Loch Ness Monster up until other people started saying there was a Loch Ness Monster. Up until that time, people saw ripples in the water, they saw shadows, they saw the head of an eel, and that's all it was. But after they're told that there's a Loch Ness Monster, now all of a sudden they're reinterpreting those events, those sights, those sounds, whatever it is, to something that's far different than it was. And that's what happened to Mike McQuarrie, and I believe that that's what happened to the majority of the accusers in this case. I think many of the accusers aren't even lying. I think that they are exaggerating based upon the fact that they were told something that was not true. And then now they believe they saw the Loch Ness Monster, when they never really did see the Loch Ness Monster because he doesn't exist.
Talking with John Ziegler. It is 14 minutes to the hour number 3 of the Dino Costa show on this Tuesday. Okay, so we've got, however you want to slice it or dice it with McQuarrie, we've got what he thinks he saw. We've got now why, I was just thinking about this before, why wouldn't Jerry think that he has this Christ-like complex when, and I didn't intend to go this way, I'm going to get into what I wanted to talk about, but I just remembered this.
Sure.
Why wouldn't Jerry think he's got this Christ-like or build up this Christ-like complex when he seemed to be enabled by a lot of people, including the kid that came home with the wet hair and the mother who said, "Where were you?" Right? She goes to the school. The kid breaks down. I saw tape of the coach or the principal who acknowledged, John, that the kid was breaking down in the office, alleging all these grotesque things. They tell the mother, "Go home and think about it." Now, if that was your kid, how would you have felt?
All right, and this is totally understandable because it's a very complex case. You're telling the story of Aaron Fisher, not the kid who was in the shower in 1998. You're talking about victim number 1, Aaron Fisher, and that is basically the story of
who was the kid that Chris Cuomo of ABC News did the expose on, right?
Yes,
okay.
Yes,
now,
yes.
you don't believe this kid at all?
Well, it's funny because before I got really deep into the case, I presumed that Aaron Fisher had to be telling the truth because he came forward before there was any money involved, right? I mean, no one knew there was going to be any money when he first came forward. He was the first victim to claim any sort of sex. He's the reason why there was a 2-year grand jury investigation. He did a TV interview. And so I'm thinking, well, even though there's some weird things about the story, he must be telling the truth. Well, now I know he's lying. And here's how I know he's lying.
How?
First of all, he has 4 different timelines for what happened to Jerry. He did not tell his story contemporaneously. His first version of the story had nothing to do with sex. The high school didn't believe him at first for darn good reason because he was known as a storyteller and a bit of a nut job, frankly. And here's the real big keys. I've spoken to 2 of his best friends who were in a car with him when he almost killed them accidentally because he crashed the car in the middle of the grand jury investigation. And neither of these kids believes that Aaron Fisher is telling the truth about Jerry. One of them was with Jerry and Aaron together, and he's positive that Aaron is lying, and that Aaron's friends all believe that he's lying. And specifically, just to give you one little detail, at the trial, there was testimony that Aaron Fisher started wetting the bed at around the age of 12 when he met Jerry Sandusky. And this was supposed to be an indication that sexual abuse had occurred. Well, guess what? Aaron Fisher used to stay over the house constantly of one of the 2 friends who was in the car that crashed. And I spoke to both the friend as well as the friend's dad. And they say that they were shocked when they heard that at trial because Aaron Fisher had stayed over at their house about 50 times, well before Aaron ever met Jerry and was 12 years old. And Aaron had wet the bed the very first time he was ever there, and had done so many, many times. So that the bedwetting is not only a lie, but here's where it gets really eerie. I actually do believe that Aaron Fisher was abused, Dino, but I don't believe it was by Jerry Sandusky. I believe it was by his stepfather. And interestingly enough, his stepfather, it's written about in Aaron Fisher's book by his mother, that his mother had suspected that his father, or the stepdad, was abusing her kids. I have a Facebook posting, by the way, from Aaron Fisher's mother going into further detail on that, bizarrely to the father of the stepdad. But then here's the real amazing thing. Last December, the stepfather of Aaron Fisher was arrested on 109 counts of child molestation, including molestation of his own child. And an indictment in Pennsylvania has followed under extraordinarily similar lines. So he's now indicted in 2 different states on child molestation charges, including his own children. Now, you tell me, Dino, what are the chances that the 2 men in consecutive eras of Aaron Fisher's life, in other words, his primary male figure is the stepdad, and it goes from the stepdad to Jerry Sandusky, what are the chances that both of them are serial pedophiles? I find that to be an impossible coincidence.
So in summation, he lays the blame of his sexual molestation not at the feet of his stepfather, but at Jerry?
Yes, with the help of a therapist by the name of Mike Gillum. And it's very interesting. By the way, Mike Gillum is Aaron's co-author. And Mike Gillum is incredibly important in this case because and this would blow people's minds, Dino, but when Jerry is arrested and Joe Paterno is fired and the shit hits the fan, only 2 human beings are claiming that they had sexual contact with Jerry Sandusky. Only 2. That would stun most people. Both of those people, Aaron Fisher and victim number 4, had the same therapist. His name, Mike Gillum. And I don't think that that's a coincidence either.
Mike Gillum is the therapist?
Yes.
Mike Gillum?
Yes.
Is also somebody who says he was abused by Sandusky?
No. Mike Gillum is the therapist for the only 2 people who claimed at the time of arrest that Jerry had actually had sex acts with them.
Zig, I got to tell you, Sandusky has got to be the most unlucky individual that I've ever heard of. I mean, because it's incredible the amount of people that have orchestrated and conspired. There's a lot of evil people in Happy Valley.
Hold on a second. Well, first of all, it's interesting that you said he's the most unlucky guy you've ever heard of, because if you remember correctly, that's what Bob Costas posed to him in his interview. And, it's funny, at the time I thought, is that really possible? And, Costas and I still email quite frequently, and I've actually told Bob that, Bob, I think you were rather prescient when you made that statement, because I do think that in many ways, Bob, not that Sandusky was the most unlucky person you've ever heard of, although he did a lot of very stupid things. Now, I want to address this conspiracy issue. I'm not alleging a conspiracy. See, when everyone understands what their self-interest is, Dino, and it becomes unequivocal, and other people are telling them how great they are for coming forward and doing this, because, my God, look at what the media has done here. I mean, we've made victimhood in this country something to be proud of, right? I mean, in general, I'm not talking about just sexual abuse. I mean, you're a victim of anything in this country. You're basically a hero in our culture. And unfortunately, in this particular case, because of the fame and money involved, we have the same set of incentives that makes this case very, very, very different from the normal sexual abuse case of children. In most cases like that, you don't have the same incentives. But the unfair firing of Joe Paterno and Graham Spanier is a nuclear explosion on this case. It changes all of the incentives because it tells the world. Penn State might as well send a letter to every trial lawyer in the state of Pennsylvania saying, yes, Fort Knox will be open for business. Come on by whenever you'd like. Make sure that you spell the name correctly and make sure you get the number right for wherever you want us to send the check.
Yeah.
I mean that's essentially what they were doing. And it's not, and frankly, I am stunned, Dino, stunned that when you consider the literally hundreds, if not thousands of kids with whom Jerry Sandusky interacted over a 20, 30-year period.
That there's not like 100 or 200.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Unbelievable.
Now, what about the janitor and his claim?
Well, the janitor situation is rather interesting. People don't realize that I think that the janitor convictions are an example of probably the worst. Think about this, Dino. The worst case of lack of due process I have ever even heard of. In that case, Jerry got convicted of major offenses without a victim. No victim testified. The so-called janitor who witnessed this didn't testify because he has dementia. There was no date for the episode given, and there was no contemporaneous report. Now, how the fuck do you defend yourself against that? No victim, no witness, no date, no contemporaneous report.
Nothing on the record from the janitor with anybody?
Nothing.
Well, then where did the report come from? Where did the allegation come from?
The allegation came 10 years later. 10 years later, one of the other janitors claimed that the witness told them this.
Okay, there was never an official report on this.
None.
With the Penn State campus police, nobody.
Nothing. Zero. I mean, can you imagine? Jerry Sandusky could be the worst pedophile in the history of the world, and that would be an absolute malpractice of due process. In fact, the judge of the appeal actually references that particular conviction and says, well, you know what? I might have erred. I'm paraphrasing. I might have erred in allowing the hearsay evidence on the janitor, but it doesn't matter because the jury would have believed everything else anyway, and the sentence still would have been the same, so go fuck yourself.
Did Sandusky want to testify?
Absolutely.
Why did Amendola make a strategic error in your opinion by not putting him on the stand?
And here's what happened. And see, this is why this case is so complex. As you know, Matt Sandusky did an interview with Oprah Winfrey last week. I did a video on this, which I hope people will take a look at, proving.
Well, let me give you my thoughts on Matt Sandusky. And you made the great point to me, something I did not know, that Matt Sandusky never had anything to do with any allegations of sexual abuse at the hands of his stepfather for all the years. Now, yes or no, Matt Sandusky is now divorced from his wife?
He divorced his first wife, and he's remarried, and I'm sure she's very happy with all the money he's
absolutely. Now, the children that he had with the first wife,
right.
The judge said no grandchildren will go and see this horrible monster, Jerry Sandusky. Matt Sandusky filed a lawsuit, I believe, to fight to have his children see Grandpa.
Yes.
And
after the arrest.
After the arrest. After Sandusky has already been in cuffs and he's being held in some jail. Okay, so it's a perfect point you make. What father of children, little children, would file a lawsuit to have Grandpa, the same Grandpa who abused him, have put his kids in the environment with this monster. Here's what I believe about Matt Sandusky. I don't believe he was abused, but I do believe he sees the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow here.
Absolutely. It's not even close, Dino, and it's important to point out.
And Oprah didn't raise this issue?
No, because she didn't know about it. I mean, she's an idiot. I mean, and interestingly, she didn't even ask. How do you not ask, seriously, Dino, how do you not ask Matt Sandusky about the only time he testified in this case? He testified under oath in the grand jury.
And said?
Nothing ever happened, and in fact, I don't believe the accusers.
But sitting in the courtroom and listening to all the testimony, all of a sudden his memory was jarred. He had covered it. His mind didn't want to think about it. Oh, by the way, yes, my stepdad did abuse me too. Put me on the list now.
Right, but it gets worse than that. His first version of the story, which he told police in the middle of the trial, his first version of the story was, well, Jerry used to come into my bedroom at night and kiss me on the stomach, and he may have grazed my penis with his hand a few times. That was the abuse. When he got on Oprah, all of a sudden Jerry was giving him blowjobs and sticking his finger up his ass. I mean, how the fuck did you just suddenly remember that? I mean.
Well, the other guy got $3 million, John. He sees this, so
exactly.
The new wife says, "Hey, let's be smart about this."
I'm glad you're finally seeing it the way that it is. But
I agree with you on that one. Yes.
But here's the point. So in the middle of the trial, they actually think, Amendola does, that the trial's going well, which is important to point out, because there's no cameras in the courtroom in Pennsylvania. This is conceivable because the media had a stranglehold on the narrative. So, and I have read the transcripts, and I understand why they think the trial was going well, even though the media was telling us that Jerry was getting clobbered. So they think the trial is going well. All of a sudden, the prosecution threatens to put Matt Sandusky on the stand. Now, you got to remember, Matt Sandusky was in the courtroom sitting next to Dottie on day one. Okay?
Right, solidarity.
Right. So how devastating would it be? The only way Matt can get in the trial is if Jerry goes on the stand, right? Because here's why. Because it's the defense's turn. If Jerry goes on the stand, they can ask him about Matt. That makes him relevant. Then they can bring Matt on the stand, okay? So they know that if Jerry doesn't take the stand, Matt can't testify. So if you're the defense team and you think that the trial has gone well and you've created reasonable doubt, do you take a chance of the jury connecting the guy they saw sitting next to Dottie on day one to the guy who's now saying that Jerry molested him?
Right.
Would you do that?
Right.
No.
Right.
You would not do that.
Of course.
And so Joe, unfortunately, see, what I would have done, and by the way, it's not 20/20 hindsight because I felt this way at the time, once I knew what Matt was all about. I would have embraced Matt Sandusky. I would have said, bring him the fuck on the stand, because I'm going to show you what the rest of this case is about, because Matt Sandusky is the rest of this case on steroids, all right? And it's just a lot easier to see with Matt Sandusky because it's so freaking obvious. But unfortunately, Amendola, who, he was overwhelmed. He was in an incredibly difficult situation. He made what he thought was the right decision at the time. It was a mistake. And unfortunately, and Jerry not testifying was a huge issue for me, Dino. Huge. I'm a prosecution guy. I think everybody's fucking guilty. I mean, and so I'm no bleeding heart liberal by any stretch of the imagination. It was huge for me to get over that. But now that I understand the full context of everything, as I've just explained, I think it makes sense.
What do you think? I mean, what does your gut tell you, John? I mean, is there any chance that this case can be retried, or is it just too far down the road now?
Well, there is a post-conviction relief process. His appeals have already been denied, but there's what's called a post-conviction relief process. Up until last week, I had a lot of confidence in Jerry's new lawyer. I no longer have that confidence, so I am exceedingly pessimistic.
Why not? Why don't you have confidence in this guy?
Because they completely blew the Matt Sandusky response, and I knew they would, and I warned them. I told them exactly what they needed to do.
You mean the Matt Sandusky now saying that he was sexually abused?
Right.
You think they should have taken that and done what with it?
I think they should have made. They should have made hay out of it. I think they should have tried to make it a big deal. Tried to let's have this debate, because this is a debate they would win. I mean, you've already shown that. You don't believe Matt Sandusky.
No, not at all.
So what I think a lot of people, and I've seen this in my own feedback that I get, a lot of people go, well, wait a minute. if Matt's lying, and I think it's clear that he is, then why do we not think that any of these other people who got millions of dollars might have been lying? And this is something that starts to get people to think. And unfortunately, they don't understand, this lawyer doesn't fully understand, and the Sandusky children don't understand, and Dottie doesn't fully understand, that this is a PR battle. Because in order for a judge or any kind of a judicial committee to make a decision that's perceived as pro-Jerry Sandusky, they have to have political cover. They're not going to do it without political cover. Why would you do that? And unfortunately, that's what my crusade has been, is to try to provide some political cover for that so that there actually is a fair trial. I think I have failed. I don't think it's really my fault. I was going up against a mountain. But, I just, to be very honest with you, as I always am, I'm not optimistic, although legally, if this ever gets into a fair hearing, people will be blown away by the lack of evidence. I mean, there's no evidence, Dino, where there ought to be tons of evidence.
Okay, now, if there's no evidence, then in your opinion, as you look back at this case, what was the one shoe that fell, whether it was true or not, that in your mind was the shoe that fell that put Sandusky away? Was it Paterno getting fired?
Yes, but there's a shoe before that, and it's funny that you say, which shoe. I think your instincts are good. This was the ultimate domino. Everything, but I think the key domino was when the grand jury presentment gets leaked on the day that Jerry Sandusky is arrested, and it claims in there that a graduate assistant, later to be known as Mike McQuarrie, witnessed anal intercourse. Now, those two words had no business being in the grand jury presentment. Mike McQuarrie complained about them being in the grand jury presentment the day after Joe Paterno was fired. Talk about being a day late and a dollar short. Mike McQuarrie never claimed that. Jerry Sandusky was found not guilty on that charge, even by the hanging jury in this case. It was those two words that made everybody's heads explode. And it's what drove the media narrative. And it got Joe Paterno fired, it got Graham Spanier fired, which led to the Free Report, which led to Penn State settlements and the NCAA. Everything is a domino effect from two words: anal intercourse. It's really amazing.
The Free Report, which was, again, added a lot of fuel to the fire when the Free Report came out. You've read the whole thing a couple different times.
Sure.
You discredit it from beginning to end?
Well, discredit meaning I don't think...
because they threw a lot of money, John, into that thing.
Well, here's what happened. I mean, Louis Freeh has a record. I mean, this is not me making this up. You can look it up for yourself. He has a record of doing two things: doing investigations that find miraculously exactly what the people paying him wanted him to find, and two, being overturned later. He said several situations.
Hold on a second. You say that he's got a record of finding things that instinctively he concludes that the people paying him want him to find.
Exactly.
Penn State paid for the Free Report.
Right.
You believe that the Penn State officials wanted him to come out and destroy the university in the way that the Free Report obviously did?
Of course, but here's the fundamental misunderstanding people have about the case, and I totally get your confusion. But when you understand this, you'll unlock why everything happened here, Dino. Think about it this way: they fired Joe Paterno, they fired Graham Spanier. A huge portion of Penn State's alumni base is enraged by this, because they had no business firing Joe Paterno. They had no evidence to fire Joe Paterno. They destroyed his legacy. He dies a couple months later. So what do the members of the Board of Trustees who voted to do that unanimously want? What do they need?
Something to advocate their decision.
Exactly.
All right. Okay. I see. Well, I tell you, John, I want you to be right. I really do. I want you to be right. I hope you're right in the end. I hope something miraculous happens that proves that, you know what, your nose for this was the right one. You're working against a Category 10 hurricane with the rest of the collective media, of course. Speaking of which, and I emailed you last week, I asked if you knew that writer in Pennsylvania who saw the piece on Matt Sandusky with Oprah.
Right.
And now this guy's got to know, right? I mean, he's got to know that Matt Sandusky sat with Dottie during the trial. He's got to know that Matt Sandusky fought to have his children see the monster that he now says abused him too. he ignores all of this completely unethically?
I don't know. He's a moron, so it's possible he doesn't know a lot of all of this. Because part of the problem here in this perfect storm is everyone thinks they know the story, so they stop investigating. So they think they know the narrative. But I understand your instincts here. Your instincts are that he's just doing the politically correct thing, right? I mean, it's politically correct.
Ignoring, evidence that he should bring into the fray himself.
Well, this is.
I mean, the story he should have wrote should have been, gee whiz, boy, it was heartbreaking to hear Matt Sandusky on Oprah, but I've got some questions about this.
Exactly. Well, that would be risky, because then he would be opening himself up to, criticism.
Why? Well, why, though? I mean, look, you know me. I've been on the opposite side of this thing for a long time with you. But at the same time, open-minded enough to hear your theories, to consider some alternative means of thought, to consider other things. What precludes the rest of the media from being open-minded?
I wish I understood that.
That was a stupid question, wasn't it?
Because you're about one of the only you and Bob Costas are about the only two people who listen to me. As far as being open-minded are concerned, I wish I had an answer to that one. But as far as this guy in particular, I'll tell you a very quick story. This is the guy who actually claimed. I'll tell you as quickly as I can. He had an interview with Bill O'Brien telling him that Bill O'Brien was going to leave to go to the pros. And then he writes a column after that interview, which he doesn't publish the interview, saying that he thinks Bill O'Brien's going to stay. and then after O'Brien leaves, he says, oh, by the way, I had this interview with O'Brien telling me he was going to leave.
Great journalist there.
Exactly.
This guy's on the ball.
Yeah.
Well, John, as we wrap it up, I was on my way to saying, I hope you're right. And again, you mentioned a perfect storm. I said that he's the unluckiest, that Bob Costa said it too, I guess, unluckiest person I've ever seen. All these people making allegations with their eyes on money. And like I said, a lot of evil people that reside in Happy Valley, because in the end, to consider the sobering thought that if you're right, then an innocent man has not only been sitting in a jail cell for a while right now, but a man has ended his life in such shame and in such disrepute that is completely and totally, innocent of these horrendous allegations against him. It's some way to go into your final days and in your final years of your life, a life that you thought had some merit, where you were helping children, not hurting children. It is the ultimate in a horror story, and it's almost too much to fathom.
That's a great way to put it. It is, but it's actually true. And I got to tell you, it means a lot to me that you have been as open-minded as you've been to at least be, considering what I'm telling you here. And even if I've moved you a little bit, it makes all this hard work. And believe me, I have endured an enormous amount of criticism over the last 2.5 years. And I haven't had too many moments where I felt like it was worth it. But if I've moved you at all, then maybe it was. And so
on a personal level,
appreciate the time.
Absolutely, and John is a father. He's married. On a personal level, has Mrs. Ziegler ever rolled over in bed and said, "Honey, let's just stop," because she cares about you, obviously, and she knows that people are coming after you left and right? I mean, or on the other hand, does she say, "John, keep going"?
Well, Mrs. Ziegler has been a saint, although I can assure you that there have been times when she has given me an enormous amount of grief for this as well. I would not be able to do this if, ironically enough, she didn't believe that Jerry was innocent before I came to that conclusion.
Really? And I met your wife, by the way, very nice woman.
She's a school teacher of the very same age of these kids when they were allegedly abused, and she doesn't believe it for a second. So she knows that I'm trying to do the right thing, but it's not easy, because there's a very, very good chance that because of this I will never be able to work again. My daughter will only know me as an unemployed loser, and that our lives are going to be dramatically impacted by this attempt to try to find and tell the truth of this case. But I knew I'm the only person that was willing and able to do it, and somebody had to. This was too important, and so I found myself in a situation. I had to do what I thought was right.
Well, Zig, again, I go back to what I said earlier in our conversation here today, and that is this: that The kid in the shower, to me, is the key to unlocking a massive door where a lot of new things could happen. You've been incredible in your investigative work. You've pushed. You got inside the jail cell. You talked to Sandusky. You have got to get to this kid. And if what you say is true, this kid will go on record, hold a fucking press conference, and invite the world. Because if he stands up, John, and says, listen, I got to tell you, I can't live with myself. Sandusky never laid a hand on me. I'm here to tell you, and I will answer any question you have. John, your cause will be aided in a great big way there.
I realize that, but that's asking a lot. Believe me, I'm trying. I'm trying, Dino. I don't give up easy. I don't give up.
All right, John.
Always good to talk to you, Dino.
Same here, my friend. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
That's John Ziegler, and we thank you for coming on board the show. Went a little overtime today, Mr. Kimosabe, but it was worth it. FramingPaterno.com. FramingPaterno.com is the website. You can go on and follow this thing with John. And there's questions. You know what I mean? I think I said earlier in the show, even at this point, no matter how you feel, if you get down to brass tacks, you take a real hard and fast look at this. There's a lot of questions that haven't been answered. And while I don't agree with all of John's theories, I am motivated to at least open up a piece of my mind to consider some things that he's been talking about. He's the only one talking about it, by the way. And when you have media ignoring, for instance, completely ignoring, all you heard about was Oprah and the heartbreaking interview with Matt Sandusky. And Oprah never once mentioned to Matt Sandusky, gee whiz, an epiphany you've suddenly had that you were sexually molested. Yet, you sat next to your stepmother during the trial and you fought legally. After Sandusky was arrested and was in prison, you fought to have your children, his grandchildren, see the very monster that you say sexually abused you. It's pretty interesting.